Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second Library Knowledge Workshop. Today it's Bibliometrics and the fiscal year 2017 NOAA Publications Analysis. I'm Sarah Davis, and I'm here with my colleague Jamie Roberts. We are 2/3 of the library's Bibliometrics team. Our lost third is Jan Thomas out in College Park. Hi, Jan. I imagine most of you saw Admiral Gallaudet's email about the NOAA publications list last month, and I know it raised a lot of questions, but hopefully we can answer most of those today. Don't turn it off. Is it paused? Okay. We're going to start off by going over some of the fundamentals of bibliometrics and the indicators and metrics we use, and then we'll get into the reports we produce and that online publications list. So it's kind of a lot to cover, and I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Jamie.
Hey everyone, so I'm just going to talk about what are bibliometrics, what is bibliometrics. It's one of those, and then just go through some different types of metrics that are common in the profession and that we use in the library. So what is bibliometrics? It's the scientific and quantitative analysis of academic research. Basically, they are metrics that can be used to evaluate program output, identify trends in scientific research, help authors select journals to publish in, and help library staff evaluate journal resources. So let's jump into types of metrics. So publication and citation metrics are the core metrics of the entirety of bibliometrics. They are the building blocks of where other metrics come from. Publication metrics give us different ways to understand publishing counts. For instance, the chart on the left shows articles per year per line office from 2012 to 2016. But we could just as easily produce a chart showing publishing by journal title or funding agency. These are just ways to let us quantify and view our publishing output. While on the other hand, on the other side of the screen, citation metrics give us a way to understand the potential impact or influence of our output. Citation metrics tell us if anyone is looking at what we're publishing. The one caveat with citation metrics being that there is a gap from when articles are published until there are meaningful citation metrics. It's at least 24 months, and that's just due to the publication cycle. You have to publish an article, someone has to see it, want to cite it, write an article, get that article published. So it just does take some time. Moving on to H-index. I think H-index is the one that most researchers have maybe heard about before and are likely a little bit familiar with. It's a measure of productivity and influence. It's sort of a merger of publication and citation. So this chart illustrates how the Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, H-index, was calculated. There's two lines crossed. There were 56 publications that had at least 56 citations each. So their H-index is 56. What H-index does really well is gives perspective to outliers in citation counts. If you've written a paper that gets hundreds of citations, that's great. But if you've only written 5 papers in your career, your H-index would be 5, assuming that those 4 other papers have at least 5 citations each. The downside of H-index is that it can't be compared between fields because publishing and citation behavior is different between fields. And it does favor people who've had longer careers, who have been writing and publishing longer. You might be thinking, okay, so what does H-index really mean with these caveats? It's important to remember that in bibliometrics, bibliometrics is storytelling, and all of the different points are plot points. Sorry, that's one of Sarah's favorite things to say. So they're an integral part of the story of research and publishing, but they don't mean much in isolation. So next up, we'll talk about percentile ranks. Percentile ranks are harder to calculate than H-index, but they can be compared across disciplines. They're normalized. What we're really interested in is in discovering the top 10% of cited papers in a discipline. Those are the papers that everyone in the field is talking about in their papers. Percentile ranks can show us sort of performance and engagements. For instance, in this chart, you can see people seem very excited about what OER has been doing in evolutionary biology. There's a lot of citations happening there. Of course, there's always a but. The caveat with percentile ranks, citation metrics, is that not all citations are necessarily positive. You could be getting citations because your work is controversial or people have concerns about it. There's that infamous Lancet mercury vaccine article. That's got a lot of citations. Those aren't positive citations. But again, percentile rank, like everything else, it's a plot point, it's not the whole story. So H-index and percentile ranks help us see if articles are being cited. They tell us if anyone is looking. But analysis of citing articles is more about who is looking. So researchers from where, in what discipline, from what agency. It gives us more of a glimpse of who our audience is for our publishing. So taking a step away from citation-based metrics, we can also talk about collaboration metrics, or who is working together to produce articles. For instance, from this map, you can see that NOAA authors co-author papers with researchers all over the world, except not so much North Africa. So that's an interesting thing to recognize and realize. We can describe collaboration within line offices as a percentage rate, in that almost 6% of NOAA publications in 2017 had inter-line office collaborations, or you can see a visual representation of those collaborations in the lower right corner. Okay. Should I just move closer to the mic? Cool. Cool. Sorry, find my spot. So moving on to author metrics. Author metrics are something that our bibliometrics program does not work with as often compared to some of these other things that I've been talking about, but resources are available and we can definitely assist you. If you're interested in tracking your own H-index and citation rates, we'd highly recommend registering for a researcher ID, which not only helps you identify articles, but provides some basic tools and metrics for determining more complex metrics about your work. For author metrics, Google Scholar is out there. It's not my favorite. It's kind of a noisy data set. You kind of have to do some digging around and do some self-verification of the citations and things in there. But it's definitely available. It's definitely a thing that people use. You can use it. It's not my favorite. And the last metric I'm going to talk about is journal metrics. And journal metrics are great for using to decide where you'd like to publish. If you want to look for something that is reputable is a big word to throw out, but something that's sort of reputable or well recognized in the field, check out something's journal impact factor or journal metrics. They're also great. The library uses them as part of our assessment process to decide what to buy. Weirdly, though, you might look, if they don't work in the reverse, you can look at them and say, I would like to place an article in here because this is a reputable journal. That doesn't mean that everything in that journal is universally fantastic. You can't say, you can't reverse that affiliation as well as you can pay it forward. But it's a good point to consider. And now I'm going to hand this off to Sarah.
So we do a lot of different bibliometrics projects in the library, but our Keystone project, the real core of our program, is the NOAA-wide publications tracking project. It's something we started in 2012, and we work on it year-round. It starts with weekly Web of Science searches, and the results of those searches are managed in an EndNote database. And then from this highly curated bibliography we've built, we create quarterly reports, we create an annual publications analysis, and we also create that online list that a lot of people have seen that's updated quarterly. Our primary product out of this is the quarterly publications report. It's an Excel workbook that we put together each quarter, and it contains some basic metrics and breakdowns and lists of each line office's articles, as well as some programs and articles that were funded by NOAA. We produce 5 of these a year. There's one each quarter, as well as a fifth one that we do the second quarter of the following fiscal year to update and take into account the indexing delay in Web of Science. It can sometimes take them several months to get up to speed with every single article. Also, this report is cumulative for the year, so we start fresh every fiscal year, and each quarter we add the next quarter and it builds, so it gets bigger and bigger throughout the year, and then we start again the next year. The byproduct of this report is the searchable list that we have on our website. It's often referred to as a database, but it's more accurately, it's a data table. And I just mentioned that because due to the nature of the table and the metadata that we collect, it's currently just NOAA authored articles. The funded articles that we collect don't make it onto this list right now. The list is sortable by all the different columns, so author, title, line office, lab. It's also searchable by each of those columns. You can find your article, you can find articles with certain terms in the title, a particular lab, or just collect everything from quarter. And there is a CSV file made available that pairs with this that is downloadable at the website. So we get a lot of questions about how we put this list together. As I mentioned before, we do weekly Web of Science searches, and we do that using the search string here on the right. This is just for the NOAA authored one. We have a separate, very long search string for NOAA funded articles. This has multiple variations of NOAA, all the line offices, most of the programs. We've tried to get in all the variations possible so that we cast a very wide net, and then we look at every single result from those searches to verify that it is in fact a NOAA authored article. We cross-check that with the NOAA staff directory and add metadata concerning the associated line offices, divisions, labs, programs, the fiscal year and quarter, and some other metadata that will be useful for us later. All of these records are saved in our master EndNote library, which we use as the foundation for the quarterly and annual reports and most of the other projects that we do. There's a few separate things that are either ongoing or special that get their own libraries, but most of what we do comes out of this master curated bibliography. So to clarify, the list only includes peer-reviewed articles that are indexed in Web of Science and have one or more authors who listed NOAA as their affiliation. There are a number of reasons why any given article might not be on the list. The biggest one is that it's not a peer-reviewed article. It's a magazine article, it's a tech memo or report, it's a conference paper, something like that. It might also not be in a journal that's indexed by Web of Science or be journal content that is indexed by Web of Science. There's a few different reasons for that. It might not be of a quality that Web of Science would consider. It might be very new, so it hasn't gone through the process. Or it could be of these like social science and humanities variety. We are expanding our subscription soon-ish, and we will do a retroactive search to catch things from 2012 to present that we would have missed in that expanded index. There's also a possibility that an article hasn't been indexed yet. So just because you don't see your article yet in the list doesn't mean it won't appear eventually. There is that delay. There's also a really big delay between when an article is accepted for publication and when it is actually published. We list things for the quarter that they are published in, as listed by the journal and Web of Science. The other big problem we see is that the authors of the article may not have listed NOAA as their affiliation. We understand that a lot of NOAA authors have multiple affiliations. You work with a university, you work with another research program. If it doesn't say NOAA in the author affiliation, it does not fall within the scope of this project. It's It's important to note here that while this list is really well defined, it's not comprehensive. It's not everything that NOAA publishes, and it isn't meant to be a sole indicator of output. As we mentioned before, these are plot points in the greater story of what NOAA is accomplishing. So the other big product we do, which sort of is a pretty summary of those quarterly reports we put together, is the annual publications analysis. We put this together every January for the fiscal year previous, and we look at all the NOAA authors that we've collected through the year and provide a number of publication and collaboration metrics. We don't do citation metrics or analysis of citing articles in this report because it's from the previous fiscal year. They wouldn't be impressive numbers. We wait a while for that. And we also look at some trend data. So every year we update some trend graphs to show that we're still on pace, what things have, we've accomplished over the past 5 or 6 years. We've pulled just a few highlights from the FY2017 report that we'd like to share. The first being that NOAA Authors published more than 2,000 articles in FY2017, and this isn't including the other, I believe, about 1,800 articles by authors who received NOAA funding. This is a pretty impressive number, we think. Also, these papers represent collaborations with other research institutions in 209 countries around the globe. In other collaboration news, we were able to calculate that more than 12% of these articles involve collaborations between authors in different units of NOAA. It really shows how connected all the different wings of NOAA is. It's one NOAA, and you get to see that Weather Service is working a lot with OAR, and Fisheries is working with NOS. It's pretty neat. It's also color-coded, which is nice. And we have this report online on our website for download. We have previous versions available if you'd like them as well. And we have several copies here in the library if you ever just want to thumb through them. And now we have time for questions. Do we have any in the room? Trevor?
My question is, if you would take your best educated guess as to the percent of what Web of Science does catch in the broader publishing footprint of NOAA. I know that's kind of difficult to answer considering you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
But yeah, what would you like best educated guess range that this does catch in terms of percent taught NOAA publishers?
Okay, so the question from the room was, what is our best educated guess at what percent of NOAA publications are being caught in our Web of Science search? We recently did a data call to get articles, and we were very pleased to find, I can't calculate the percentage off the top of my head, but, oh, Jamie knows, it is?
What we had in our publication list versus what people submitted to that call, we had 97%.
So we had 97% of what was submitted in the data call. There were, I think, all told, less than 100 articles that we missed either because they were not indexed by Web of Science or because some error, which I think might be an IP authentication thing that happened earlier this year when we had some subscription issues. But that there were 70 something, I think there were about 70 articles all told that were not indexed in Web of Science, that were NOAA authored, that we had not collected. So it's a pretty good rate. We've also done some tests with other databases. We tested Scopus and some other indexes, and it is comparable results. We are catching most of the peer-reviewed journal articles, which is another good thing to stress. A lot of offices don't publish as many peer-reviewed articles. They have more tech reports. That's handled differently. That wouldn't be on this list.
We have a few questions online. Our first question is from Rebecca Briggs. She's asking that NOAA-funded articles that you're finding through Web of Science, why would they not be included on the list?
So there's a question from online about why aren't NOAA-funded articles included on the list. The online list is a CSV file, and the way that we collect metadata, it's different metadata fields for NOAA-funded articles and NOAA-authored articles. We cannot combine those currently into the same table and make them searchable. We also don't have as many details on NOAA-funded articles. We're still working out the kinks in the process of identifying who funded those articles. We know that NOAA funded them, but with a handful of exceptions, we can identify CIs and certain programs, largely because they've told us how to identify those programs. We don't have as many details. We would just be able to give titles. Those do show up in the quarterly report that goes out, and if anyone wants to look at that, they can. We have that available. But at this time, it is not in the online searchable list. It's currently not in the annual report because that's not what was asked of us. And collecting the NOAA-funded articles is a much more recent addition to this program. We've only been doing that for a couple years, whereas we've been collecting authored articles since 2012.
Another question from Robin. Do you have an internal system for author reporting publications?
We have a question from online about, do we have an internal system for author-reported publications? We do not. We collect through these Web of Science searches because it is a defined scope program. Our process is reproducible, so in theory, what we put together, if you had Web of Science and the NOAA staff directory, you could also create this report. We do take suggestions from people. If you see that something's missing, we will review it and see whether or not it was just missed in our search for some reason. We adjust the search string every year to make sure that we're catching as much as possible. But no, we do not have that. We do have the NOAA IR, where you can submit your publication, or you should submit your publications, the actual articles, not just the bibliographic record. And I know that many offices have their own systems of collecting authors' publications.
We have another question asking about researcher ID and not ORCID. What does researcher ID that offer that ORCID does not?
There's a question about what does researcher ID offer that ORCID does not. Our actual recommendation is that you get a researcher ID and an ORCID ID. Once you have one set up, they're designed to make it really easy to just move everything over. You have one set up, you put your number in the other, and it moves things over. Researcher ID works well with Web of Science, and once you have a researcher ID, your ID will be attached to the Web of Science articles that you've written. If you have both, Web of Science will include both. It makes it really easy for people to find your publications. If we're doing an author level analysis, it makes it really easy for us or you or whoever in your program is doing that.
As a follow-up, different question, same vein, can a funding program request a researcher ID and get metrics on their funded projects publications?
Can a funded program request a researcher ID and get metrics on their funded program? No, because it's an individual author ID. You can get a fund ref number. And we've talked to a number of programs and grant offices that suggest authors should be strongly encouraged to use certain terminology in their acknowledgments and funding information when they publish, so that it makes it easier to find and identify. Because if that's in there, we collect that metadata, we can find it. One more note about the researcher ID. It does have a bit of an advantage that if you are an author, you have a researcher ID, you can input a paper that you're publishing and it will help you find the right journal. So you don't have to figure out all those journal metrics. It will help you find a good journal to submit to. There's also some tools to find collaborators for projects. So that would be the advantage. We're not terribly biased towards the Clarivate Web of Science suite, but we are a Web of Science house. So they are the tools we have and the tools we use. We strongly encourage people to also have an ORCID ID.
Another question. Do you complete 2 quarterly reports for the first quarter, the first FY quarterly report and the update quarterly report that captures the leftover publications from the previous FY?
Question was, do we complete 2 quarterly reports like the new? So our schedule is like this. We do a quarterly report for Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. It's business as usual. January is very busy because we do a Q1 report for the current fiscal year, and we do an update of the previous fiscal year, and then we do the annual report built on the update of the previous fiscal year. So yes, there is 1 quarter a year where we just keep producing reports. And there's some other specialized office reports that we do as well. January is very busy. But if you want the most up-to-date list, the first or second week of January is the time to contact us.
Another question. If a CI employee is the only author, but the author's affiliation is NOAA, OAR, ESRL, will that peer-reviewed publication show up on the list, assuming it's in the Web of Science?
You're going to have to repeat that.
If a CI employee is the only author, but their affiliation is with NOAA, assuming it's in the Web of Science.
Yeah. So there's a question about
Will that show up?
CI authors. If they're the only author or one of the authors and their affiliation is Esrol or something like that. This is something that comes up a lot. There are a lot of CI authors that are also affiliated with NOAA offices, particularly Esrol. They will show up on the list. We're not going to exclude something because it is also funded. If any NOAA office is listed as the author affiliation, it's on the list. If it isn't and it's funded, it's on a different list. But we try to catch everything. We have one more from the room.
Have you ever taken something from like 2012, 2013, an older report, and redone that later on with, I assume, with Web of Science, there are changes in 5 years. Have you thought about that, or have you, looked at maybe rerunning that to see if there's any updates to impact from those years?
So there's a question about whether or not we do updates from previous years, because there are updates in Web of Science. When Web of Science indexes new journals, because they do periodically do that, and they do the back catalog, those will show up in our search because we sort by, our results are what has been recently indexed. It's not just what's been recently published. So we got something from 2015 a couple weeks ago. We don't republish those reports unless they're asked for, but they are added to our bibliography and they are put in the online list.
And those increased numbers are reflected in the trend data that comes out in the annual report. If it's something that shows like a past 5-year trend, that article is then included in that appropriate year count.
And we do periodically go through and do sort of quality check searches to see if there's maybe chunks that somehow slip through the cracks. They do updates pretty frequently. I know a few things were missed because someone, you can always contact Web of Science to make edits. So I know that some people have contacted Web of Science and been like, hey, actually, the DOI on this is wrong, or the author affiliations on this are incorrect. Those we try to catch later on. I do a sweep at the end of the year to weed through a lot of results and try to find what we might have missed. But we do catch things that are indexed after the fact.
Phil is asking that she's saying in reviewing the list of publications for the FY2017 for her division, there were several publications that didn't belong to her division. So what's the process for reporting errors?
So if you find an error in the list, because there's a question about finding errors in the list, you email us and we will look at them and try to figure out what happened. Sometimes there's somebody moved or we assumed, there's a lot of people who have the same name at NOAA and occasionally we get those wrong. So you can always let us know and we'll take another look and correct the list. Okay, so that looks like we're done unless there's anything else from the room. I want to thank everybody. If you have any more questions, you can email us. We have our email addresses here. There's the links to our Bibliometrics information on the website, as well as that list of publications, which also has a PDF link for the report. Oh, and we will be sharing this online later. Thank you, Katie. Are we done?
I'm so rarely told to speak up.